Good evening. I am the narrator, and welcome to my parlor. Tonight's story is The Vines. I was born and raised in the village Penrith. There I kept my modest home and made my modest living, just like my father before me, and his before him. Just like all its residents. No one moved there. There was no reason. One's lot would only worsen. No one left, though there was reason. Their lot would perhaps improve, but what little they had they couldn't risk losing. There we were, and there it was, with only the necessities. Our fields and hovels, our bakery and butchery, our inn and tavern. Travelers came and went as quickly as they could. The wood was decomposing, the paint had chipped and faded. The stone foundations were nearly dust, and their windows' cracks grew ever larger. Somehow it all held together. Little happened there. When something did, it was news, even if it would be nowhere else. No news was good news, and what news we had we cared not to hear. One day that all changed. Before I proceed, I must describe myself. I was typical. Like the others, my clothes were the same for years on end, never replaced, only sustained with a sewing machine. Like them, able or not, I worked the field. With the flail, the fork, the harrow, and the plow, across all 40 acres that simply couldn't be tilled. I planted, I watered, I fertilized with horse feces. I watched the crops, the corn, the carrots, and potatoes grow and heave them from the ground to be counted, hauled, and carted to the market. My mind and body bore the brunt, as plain by passing glance. To what end, I often asked. Our crops were small, frail, and undernourished, withered even while ripe, unfit for sale, much less consumption. One night we were about to retire for whatever sleep we could have. This would be hard. The yield was sparse, but we had survived this before. Yearly we lost residents to disease, starvation, and the elements, and yet we were never among them. The sky had darkened. The field and forest were hard to see. Not so much, however, we couldn't see the strange light falling from the sky. Normally, when the light left us, we hastened home. That night, we took our chances. We had to. Recall what I said of what passed for news. We gazed at each other and then at it, whatever it would turn out to be. We hastened forth to the patch where it landed. There we crouched and peered. We failed to find it, so would try again the next day. Perhaps by morning sun we would succeed. I began to ponder. Perhaps it was just an earthlight, and dissolved before landing? Perhaps our search had been a waste. "Come, I've found it," Teal, a veteran field hand, called. Evidently not. How he found it by only moonlight we knew not. Still we obliged. Our first inspection wasn't promising. He had found something unfamiliar, but that didn't make it significant. It was a seed of a type we'd never seen. If planted, it would grow into a crop we'd never seen. Still, it was a seed. Nothing, we dismissed. Thus we dispersed, even Teal, who had found it in the first place. I returned to my hovel where I lived alone. I was exhausted, both from toiling and hiking home. We had trudged along the same dirt path through the same woods for years without complaint. If there was anyone to listen, I would have been the first. I lay in bed, drifting to sleep as the embers flickered in my fireplace. I knew the village and what I would hear when I awoke. My eyes opened, my ears recoiled. It had already begun. Recall again what I said of news. Shouts, shouts, and yet more shouts, blent into one den. Words, words, and yet more words, blended into one. It. Have you heard? Have you seen it? If not, we'll tell you all about it. If not, we insist you go and see it. See? It's right there. Look at it. Look. What do you think it is? Of course I knew, having been there when it arrived, having been among its finders. But they did not know this, and knowing them, they wouldn't care. Knock, knock, on my front door. Eaton? My name, just as predicted. Yes, I groaned. As you would guess, I was soon on my feet and out my door, and to think this was my day off. In the square, the village had gathered, moving like a herd toward the field. I saw among them my fellow field hands. All but one was present, Teal. As usual, I had to take part. We trudged along the path I vowed never to on what was to be my vacation. I, on the other hand, resented this. Still, the mood couldn't be spoiled. Soon we reached the field, beyond which was the patch where the seed had landed. There stood Teal, smiling, his arms folded with pride, as I had partly expected. The throng rushed forth. I watched from a distance. To my surprise, the sight was worth seeing. For once, the herd may have been right. The seed was no longer a seed, but a plant. Green vines grew from the spot. I had two questions. First, it had landed but had not been planted. Who had, or had it planted itself? Had it, somehow? It had planted, or been planted, but only the night before. How it had grown in just 8 hours. Our soil was not known for quality, as our crops showed. The villagers gathered around, studied and discussed it, with Teal and with each other. He delighted in fielding their queries, taking full credit, whatever it would turn out to be. Eventually they saw and heard all there was to and lost interest. Then they returned to the village. He stood behind and watched admiringly, then saw me and waved me forth. I obliged, having my own questions. He obliged, already having answers. No, he didn't linger and planted himself after we left. Yes, he was as surprised as we are. No, he didn't water or fertilize it in any way. Yes, this was spontaneous. As we spoke, I sensed I was being watched, that I was being heard. By what, I had no idea, so dismissed the thought. Before I left, I looked at the plant and noticed something I hadn't before, pink berries on its vines. Wine, he declared. Wine, I muttered, and bid him adieu. When I awoke the next morning, to my relief, the buzz had faded. No one was gathered in the square. No one spoke, least not of it. No one called my name. While I enjoyed this, and as much as I enjoyed anything, it didn't mean things were back to normal. I tied my boots and went to work. When I arrived, things seemed normal. The other field hands were there, awaiting me. There was only one notable absence. Teal, though we could have used him. He had more important tasks, namely tending his discovery. The others watched me watching him unknowingly. Evidently they'd already heard the morning news. I, however, hadn't. Either out of curiosity or obligation, I felt moved to rectify this. What happened? I asked. They shook their heads in irritation. I could have left it at that, but didn't. I turned to Teal, and he waved me forth. Before I could ask, I noticed two things. First, the vines had grown prodigiously. Their first spurt was remarkable, but this was greater still. In one night they had grown from inches to feet, or so I deduced without a ruler. Second, the berries had grown prodigiously, in size and number. There were more of them, many more. Just the day before, they could be stomped without a thought. Now, that would take effort. They were easily the size of apples. He noticed me noticing, and smiled as knowingly as our co-workers had grimaced. While he'd nothing to do with this development, he more than happily took credit, and told me as much. Wine? I asked. Wine, he affirmed. I hastened back to the others, not so fast as suspicions would rouse, but fast enough not to irritate them. There was one detail I couldn't help but notice. His fingertips had turned green. The day went as usual. We hadn't noticed, but he must have vanished sometime during. When we left, he wasn't with us. Wait for me, I told the others. Don't take too long. I had to see them again, and did, returning to and inspecting them. Though this was my first time seeing them alone, I didn't feel alone. Again, I sensed I had been watched. The sensation lasted until I returned to the village. By then, it may as well not even have bothered. The commotion had resurged, this time at the inn. I paused at its fogged window. There I saw the villagers at the table and the counter. Teal stood in the center of both the room and their attention. I couldn't see his fingertips, but he had cleaned them. He threw his hands in the air excitedly. His lips flailed open and closed. I knew precisely what he was saying. They fawned at his every gesture, his every word. Eyes bulged, lips fell, gasps were emitted. Eventually it ceased, and the inn fell silent, though the excitement was far from over. They rose and formed a line. He stood in front and led them to the door. I knew their destination. The mindless greetings, the mindless insistences of which I wanted no part. I crept to the back, so when the door opened I wouldn't be seen. I watched them vanish from the square and into the night. I vanished myself. Into the hovel I was reluctant to leave, but I had to feed them and myself. I awoke the next morning to the same commotion and stepped uneasily outside. The crowd had returned, and again, I wanted no part. I hastened past them, unnoticed, to the field. When I arrived, it was much the same. My co-workers awaited me, except for one they weren't expecting. This one stood aside, tending his find, and what a find! Before, I had to see it up close to see its growth. Now, that was needless. I stood where I was and saw it where it was and hated what I saw. The vines had grown, not just longer, but denser. They were the girth of a man's lower legs. Its berries had also. Before, they were the size of apples, now that of pumpkins. Moreover, they'd coarsened considerably. Only a battle axe could have destroyed them. Teal smiled and beckoned. He too had changed. Much of him was now green, from foot to toe. Even his hair had tinted, as if dyed from the plant itself. "Soon?" I called to him. "Soon," he called back. Thus it went. Every morning at the field, the place, the people, the sequence of events, all reoccurred. Only two things changed. The vines grew unabated. Teal's skin greened and greened. His hair came to resemble plant roots, his nails thorns. Somehow the village neither noticed nor cared. They liked it. Nightly they stood in line, and he led them to and from his discovery, pausing beside it to proclaim its growth, its impressive appearance. They gazed in awe and nodded. The day was soon when it would be ready, and the village would permanently change, and for the better. In time, soon came to need redefinition. What and when was soon? How he knew, if he knew, I knew not. I considered the theory he and the vines were communicating, in a way only they could hear. Naturally, I dismissed the notion. "The day has arrived," he declared from the square one morning. The village had assembled to hear, and to follow, to see the grand reveal. I accompanied, if only to keep appearances. Thus we went, I at the very back, blending in physically, though not in mind. As the field appeared, he went forth and stood before us. The work cart stood at his side. His audience gasped in awe. The vines and their berries were now massive. Their ends lay at our feet. Only I stepped back to avoid contact. "Behold," he implored, "a new day has dawned." Wine, I recalled. "Who will help me?" he thundered. Every hand rose as one. He directed, explaining and assigning tasks. They obliged, picking berries and loading carts. In time, they were so full, I thought, and hoped they would overturn, splattering their contents. To my chagrin, they didn't. He guided them back to the village, the carts pushed at his sides. His followers watched admiringly. I stayed back at a distance, luckily unnoticed. In the square stood a wine press, one that had stood for generations and never been used, at least not to my memory. That seemed about to change. Again he stepped forth and stood before them. Again he had full attention. "Who," he asked, "will prepare our first batch?" Again every hand rose as one. He selected two at random and bid them to come forth. I watched them perform the task while he instructed. "The time has come," he declared then, "to sample the fruit of our labor." He led them to the inn. There, glasses lined the counter, ornate ones inherited from our town founders. Like the wine press, they'd never been used, at least not to my memory. He held two bottles, one in each hand, which he opened and filled. Soon both shimmered with the glowing pink fluid. "Who will be the first?" he asked, again, as one. "You," he declared, and selected the man closest to him, Kane, who worked at the inn. The man being the other's harumphed. Teal handed him the glass, and he obliged. They watched in envy and excitement as he brought it to his lips. "How does it taste?" he asked slyly. Kane nodded. His eyes seemed to glaze, and he smiled blankly. It goes without saying that only I noticed. "Who's our next volunteer?" Teal asked, turning back to his audience. Before long, they all held and drank from a goblet. It incurred its effects. Luckily, I was still unnoticed. In their reverie, I slipped out and raced to my hovel. Thus it began. Penrith had been conquered. Every resident had their own goblet, filled and emptied every night and morn, at every meal and every celebration. Their transformation was unmistakable. The empty gaze became standard. Their lips turned pink, and not just from staining. Moreover, they didn't even seem to notice. One would expect the berries to run out. One would expect replacements to be awaited. However, the vines seemed to produce more and more. Every morning they seemed to have replenished. I quit work and hid in my hovel, wandering through the woods, living off whatever crops remained from the year before. The last, before the wine's advent. It was all mine by default. My neighbors seemed to have stopped eating, as if their drink now sustained them. One morning I woke and went to the square. I wasn't going to stay. It was simply the first sight en route to the forest. There I saw a man, clearly an outsider. His clothes and how he carried himself marked him as such. Likely he was from one of the prosperous villages to the north. Naturally, I was surprised. "I've heard of this place," he told me, "that it has its own wine, a local specialty that can't be missed." Before I could respond, the tavern door opened and Teal emerged. He smiled knowingly, as if expecting this man. "You've heard correctly," he declared, beckoning. The man turned and followed him inside. I peered discreetly through the window. Before long, he had a goblet, had drank from it, and likewise transformed. He was but the first. More came, and more, and more, and more, from all over the map. For the first time, the village was on one. For the first time, it thrived, just as Teal had vowed, and yet I couldn't take part. I waited until nightfall, until the village collapsed in stupor. Then I crept from my hovel into the patch, to the vines. By then, they covered the field where I once worked. They had grown dense, perversely muscular. Sharp black thorns lined them from end to end. I stood in place and sized them like a foe in combat. Then it came. That sense that I had been watched, that I had been followed. The feeling that something knew of and resented me. A new one joined it, that I was expected. I stared. Somehow they stared back. I was relieved they were rooted to the soil. They looked about to reach forth, to set upon me at any second. I had to go then and never return. I did. Luckily, I had nothing to pack, nothing to slow my pace. I ran through the woods where I came to a second field. From it were myriad paths to myriad villages. I paused and gazed upward into the sky. From it fell a glowing sphere, like the one we saw the night this all began. I gazed elsewhere and saw a second, and elsewhere and saw a third, and a fourth, and so on. Every village, though they didn't note it, awaited their arrivals. Every one harbored a man who would find them.